For, to the scandal of philosophy, it is not uncommonly alleged of this theory that what may be correct in it is yet invalid in practice. And this is said in a lofty, disdainful tone, full of the presumption of wanting to reform reason by experience, even in that in which reason puts its highest honor, and in a wisdom that can see farther and more clearly with its dim mole's eyes fixed on experience than with the eyes belonging to a being that was made to stand erect and look at the heavens. Immanuel Kant. After having spent some months here talking at length about the principles of Kant's ethics, it is now the time for some general remarks and reflections and for addressing a very common criticism of Kant's ethics. According to Kant, all ethics can be divided into two kinds according to how we deal with our ethics. You either have what he calls rigorism, or the strict virtue, or on the other hand, you have what he calls latitudinarism, or the lenient virtue. The former would be that your ethical principle, whatever it may be, allows for no exceptions, allows for no wiggling. Rather, you have a strict sense of this is good, this is my moral duty, this is what shall be done, and therefore it must be done. Period. Any excuses you might come up with, any talk about consequences, about whether this will work or whatever, doesn't figure in. It simply is your moral duty, therefore it has to be done. And this is very much Kant's attitude. Kant is a proponent of ethical rigorism. And he very much criticizes this ethica laxa, as he calls it, this latitudinarism. And he would ask, well, what would be the fundament of such a latitudinarism? On what grounds can you be a latitudinarian? And his answer would be that there can only be two reasons, or, well, justifications is really the wrong word. One would be indifferentism. So if you just don't care all that much about whether you are good or evil, then of course you can have a lenient ethics or virtue. Then of course you can say, oh, as long as I'm somewhat good, like I'm not directly murdering anyone, then that's fine. Then I'm allowed to be a little bad. I'm allowed to break some ethical laws. Like, since I don't murder anyone, I can steal the towel in the hotel room. That's not so bad. Or the other possible reason for latitudinalism, besides indifferentism, would be syncretism, Kant says. So syncretism, of course, always means combining different principles, not keeping one principle pure. And what principles would that be? Well, as I explained in my previous lecture on the imperatives, according to Kant, there can only be two practical principles. And that would be the principle of wisdom, which is the ethical principle, which comes down to his categorical imperative to following the moral law. Or there can be the principle of happiness. So doing whatever happens to benefit you and whatever you think will bring you happiness in life. Those are the two principles which Kant calls eoften or eudaimonism. And therefore, syncretism in ethics would mean mixing those two principles. So mixing, in other words, morality with happiness. That would also allow for latitudinarism, because it would mean that you would say, okay, I will try to be moral, I will try to not outright break the moral law, but I will also try to be happy. And therefore, when morality demands too much of me, and too much here not meaning necessarily something that I cannot do, but something that I don't want to do because it might somehow not benefit me personally, it might somehow not benefit my happiness, then I will not do it. Only out of indifferentism about morality, or out of a syncretism which mixes happiness with morality, can be turned to latitudinarism, says Kant. We shouldn't do that. We should rather turn to rigorism in morality. But it is precisely this rigorism of Kant, the strictness, the unrelentingness of his ethics, which often gets criticized. Things that I have addressed in previous lectures, like I talked in the lecture on the will, the good will, and the good deed. I talked about how to Kant it is only the will which counts. It is only the good will which makes the good person, not good deeds. You can have legality in your actions, that is, your actions can conform with the moral law. You can have a good empirical character, you can have the virtue phenomenon, as Kant says, so the outwardly appearing virtue, and still at your core, at your root, be a completely rotten person deserving of hell. To Kant, it is not about the actions. It is not, the actions as such don't have value if they come out of your sensuality, like out of compassion and empathy, or if they come out of your socialization, if you just do follow the values that you were raised with, even if they happen to be the right values, if you only follow them because you were raised with them, it's without value. To Kant, you are only morally good if you really have the good will, if you really follow the moral law precisely because it is the moral law, and for no other reason than your reverence for the moral law. This reverence I also addressed in its own lecture already. And this is too much, this is too harsh for many people. And this is something that has already somewhat been criticized in Kant's own day by some people. Like someone like Gabe, who was a less systematic thinker, a less deep and thorough thinker, who was more of an empiricist, more of a eclecticist and syncretist, who belonged to the at the time so-called popular philosophers, so who precisely didn't want to be too scholarly, too scientific, but rather had a more broad approach, wanted to write more for the layman. In my lecture on Kant's life, I already mentioned his controversy with Gabe, so you can check that out. But while this criticism existed already in Kant's day, it is especially nowadays, in our time, that you hear Kant criticized for the strictness of his ethics a lot. I mean, we live in an age that is superficial, we live in an age of relativism, we live in an age where the cliche that nothing is black and white, there's so many shades of gray, um, is believed to be the highest form of wisdom. And everyone who doesn't subscribe to it, everyone who does say, yes, there is absolutely black and white, and if you aren't white, then you must be black, you must be evil, is considered to be either naive, a naive idealist who doesn't really know the world, or he is considered to be totalitarian, which is something that I have heard many times. An accusation that the morality of someone like Kant, like Fichte, like myself is totalitarian, comes from people obviously who don't know at all what totalitarianism is, who certainly haven't read Arendt or whatever. But the point is that they will say nothing is black and white. You can very easily make them stop saying it. Usually a punch in the face is enough to make them stop saying it. Or, I mean, you don't even need to punch their face. You can just key their car. That's probably enough to make them stop saying that nothing is black and white. They will probably think that is very black. But that aside, it's still the case that we have this relativism. We have this refusal to accept anything like duty, like a moral law, a strict moral law. If people want to have something like a morality at all, they will nowadays often be proponents of some sort of moral heroism, meaning that they want, well, to be considered heroes simply for not murdering or raping anyone, or simply for donating some money. So they want to be treated as if this isn't simply them doing their duty. And doing your duty is not something you need to be applauded for. You need to be scrutinized if you don't do your duty, but you don't need to be applauded if you do it, because it's simply your duty. But they want to be they wanted to be treated as some sort of heroism, as if you didn't have to do it. And many of Kant's judgments, many of Kant's statements in his moral philosophy, that in his time, or in older times, if you had shown them to some ancient Stoic, for example, would have probably been applauded by many as being very noble, very manly, very sublime. Many of those statements, if you would hear them nowadays, if the common person from our present would hear them, would probably sound way too harsh or inhumane or lacking empathy, which is precisely why you usually won't hear those statements. They are, when Kant's morality is discussed, they are either glossed over because it would be inconvenient to mention them, or those who discuss Kant's morality themselves don't know those statements because Kant doesn't make them so much in his abstract works on moral theory, like the groundworks to the metaphysics of morals, or like the critique of practical reason, which are his moral works that are usually discussed. that deal with the principles of morality, like with the categorical imperative, with the reverence for the moral law. But rather he makes such statements rather in his lectures on moral philosophy that deal much more with the actual human life and with actual cases of moral action with actual specific virtues. So with the application of his moral principles. And those lectures, outside of a few Kant experts, no one usually reads them or is aware of them. So what statements am I talking about? Well, such statements as, for example, Kant saying that suicide is immoral. It's not just sad if someone kills himself, rather that someone, just like if he had killed somebody else, has broken the moral law and is guilty. Or likewise, Kant saying that begging when you are poor is immoral. Even saying that lamenting your misfortune and feeling bad about yourself, feeling miserable, that is already immoral. Kant saying that the person who laments his misfortune does not deserve to be a human. If you wail, if you cry about whatever happened to you, you must be despised. Kant says that the unfortunate person, the person to whom something bad happened, who deals with this in a strong manner, in a brave manner, such a person is deserving of compassion. But the person who cries about his own misfortune is worthy of hate. Or likewise, how Kant says, if someone needs help, if someone is suffering, of course, help him if you can. But if you can't, if there's no possible way for you to help someone who suffers, then even if he happens to be your best friend, you shouldn't feel bad because of his suffering, because thereby you would only double the suffering in the world, which would not help anyone. But rather, if you cannot help in any possible way, shrug and say, what is it to me? It's not my business. And go on with your business, go on helping others that you actually can help. Or how Kant subscribes to the old motto of all true morality, fiat justitia et pereat mundus, that is, let there be justice even if the world perishes over it. That is something that nowadays is very untimely. It will, these judgments of Kant's, they don't fit into our time of softness, our time of always looking out for the sensitivities of people, always making sure you don't offend anyone, always making sure to give everyone their safe space. Our current morality is basically the opposite of this morality of Kant's. And last but not least, there is Kant saying that the lie is not just one offense amongst others and a small offense that can be overlooked. Rather, the lie is basically the worst offense there is to him. And famously, he says that you mustn't lie, that there is no such thing as white lies, that you mustn't lie, even if by lying you could save a life. I mean, to Kant, morality is not about the consequences anyways. I discussed that in a previous lecture already. But this especially is something that gets criticized a lot nowadays. Usually you can read that on the internet if you look out for it. Usually you will have people who never bothered to really get into Kant's moral philosophy, or probably didn't read much of Kant. They just heard that, oh, Kant is against lying, even if it could save a life. And they don't understand why. They don't ask why. Like they don't bother asking what might be his reasons. Might he have good reasons? Maybe. Might he have convincing reasons? Maybe. But rather they mention this as if that alone was enough of an argument to completely dismiss Kant's moral philosophy. Oh, Kant is just that philosopher who's so strict that he says you can't even lie to save a life, so therefore we don't need to take his moral philosophy seriously. No, we don't need to take you seriously if you talk like that. There's nothing worse than thinking that you just need to mention a fact, you just need to mention an opinion someone holds, and just stating that he has this opinion is enough to refute him. No, you need to ask, why does he hold this opinion? What are his arguments? You need to refute the arguments. And unfortunately, not just in philosophy, of course, but in philosophy especially, this is a big issue. People often don't want to bother getting into the arguments. They don't want to bother self-criticizing and even considering that maybe they might be wrong. So they basically just ask, does that other person say the things I already believe? Then he is clearly saying the right things. Or does the other person say something that goes very much against the beliefs that so far I have always held? Then that other person must be wrong. If you think about it, that's a very arrogant way of judging. Only God could be allowed to judge in that way. God could, of course, say, okay, if that person believes something that I haven't believed so far, that other person must be wrong. But since we aren't God, since we aren't above error, we should not think in that manner. We should be willing to consider other opinions, even if they are very out there, so to say, even if they are in stark contrast to what we or to what our age believes. And we should be willing to entertain them. Here it's important to employ Kant's skeptical method that I discussed in its own lecture, that is about suspending your judgment for a time and first listening to all the arguments for both sides and trying to make the other side and its argument as strong, as convincing as possible before you judge. I can say that I myself also didn't warm up to Kant's moral philosophy right away. When over a decade ago I first started studying Kant, I think the first time I got really into contact with Kant's moral philosophy would have been in my second semester of studying at university, when I went to a class on Kant and Aristotle, comparing Kant's groundworks to the metaphysics of morals with Aristotle's Nicomachean ethics. And back then, I didn't really understand Kant yet, looking back. And Kant, to me, when I read him, sounded completely different from how he sounds to me now. Much more cold, much more distant from actual life. And back then, I wrote a thesis as homework for that class, which still gives testament to that. It's on my website, but it's of course in German, so if you don't speak German, there's probably no use in checking it out. But back then I preferred Aristotle's ethics over Kant's. But the point is that I didn't hold on to my timely affects and prejudices. The point is that I was willing to be touched and to change my judgments over time. The point is that I took Kant seriously enough to not just instantly dismiss him, but to study him seriously and to understand him better, and thereby came to greatly value and to greatly appreciate Kant's moral philosophy. And since I could do that, since it was possible for me, and I happen to believe that I'm not better than anyone else, I believe that you listening to this, even if you happen to have this, let's say, timely present day instinct against Kant's ethics, that you too can move beyond that instinct and can learn to better understand and better appreciate those ethics. So therefore, when talking about this rigorism to someone who rejects this, who instinctively rejects this rigorism of Kant, I would ask that person to ask himself the question, why? Because, as I always stress, Aufklärung is, sure, it's about critical thinking, but not so much about criticizing others, in this case, criticizing Kant, but rather, most of all, it is about criticizing ourselves, about self-reflection. And I can assure you that when reading a philosopher, this doesn't just go for Kant, this goes for all of them, when reading a philosopher, if you read something that you immediately reject and immediately think is wrong, the very first counter arguments you come up with surely are wrong. I don't even need to hear them. I know that they are wrong. If you really think, reading such a philosopher, such a great thinker, I'm not saying that they can never be wrong. They are not God. Of course they can be wrong. They are human too. But you should at least assume that that philosopher has thought about what he's written for a while. And that he himself has considered possible counter-arguments. And your very first reaction is therefore worthless. If you yourself think about it critically for a while, and then come to a later second reaction, that might have worse. But your first reaction is basically just gonna be, oh, he's thinking what I have already thought, or oh, he's thinking that I haven't thought so far. But you should assume that the very first, the most obvious counter argument you can come up with is something that that philosopher probably came up with himself already. And if it didn't convince him, that was probably for a reason. So I would ask you to, rather than criticize the philosopher, to rather first criticize yourself and ask yourself, what is it that I so dislike about this moral philosophy? I mean, when we break it down, all that Kant's moral philosophy comes down to really is saying the human being, by virtue of being free, of having autonomy, of being able to set his own purposes, to make his own judgments about what is good and what is bad or evil, and then to follow those judgments, to determine himself and his own actions according to those judgments, even against his own drives, doing something because through reason he understood it to be good, even though it doesn't necessarily feel good for his sensuality. by virtue of that ability, human beings have dignity. And for this dignity, we need to have reverence. This dignity must be respected under all circumstances, and therefore the human being, others, but also myself, must never be reduced to merely a means to some other end, like it was just some object, but rather he must be treated always as his own subject, also as an end or purpose in himself. And this is something which allows for no exceptions. You cannot just have reverence for human dignity sometimes and not at all other times, or um, just care for a certain group of humans, or just care for the greater number and sacrifice a smaller number or a single individual for the greater number, but rather you need to revere this human dignity always and without exception. That is really all that Kant is saying, if you break it down. And if this bothers you, someone telling you that all humans, including yourself, have dignity that must be respected under all circumstances, then maybe it's not something that's wrong with Kant, maybe it's something that's wrong with you. And I have especially found that this rigorism, no matter who supports it, whether it's Kant, whether it's Fichte, whether it's myself, sometimes people don't just criticize it, don't just reject it, they completely overreact to it. Like they get ridiculously and unreasonably angry about it. Like even if you yourself are being calm and just stating your position in a calm, objective manner, there are at least some people who seem to get triggered by someone being a proponent of such a rigorous morality. And I would always stress that he who is triggered is always wrong. If you are triggered, in that moment you stop being a human being. That is, you stop being rational, you are not thinking in a calm, sober manner about something. You are not being detached, you are not being objective, but rather like some animal, you are being ruled by your instincts, by your feelings. So, if you are being triggered, you should not make judgments. You should abstain from judging. You should first calm down, and then you should very critically judge yourself and ask yourself, what is it that triggers me so here? And it seems to me that this rigorous ethics of Kant triggers people mainly for two reasons. On the one hand, they feel like it takes away their freedom. They hear that, oh, morality is not just about being nice or acting out of compassion, helping others when I feel like it, and then maybe even getting applauded because I'm such a hero, but rather I have a moral duty, and there is a strict moral law that makes demands, and I have to follow it. If I don't, I'm evil, I'm guilty. And if I do, well, I'm still no hero, I still don't get applause. All that can be said about me then is he didn't become guilty, he didn't break the law. People don't like to hear that, they think it takes away from their freedom, but that is only because they have this liberal concept of freedom. I talked about this in my lecture on what is freedom to Kant. How what I would call the liberal concept of freedom is very superficial and is just about following your own wanton desires and your own whims and feeling unfree if someone restricts you in following your desires. But the liberal is never questioning his own desires. And if you think that's true, it would also mean that the drug addict is free if he gets his drugs. and only unfree if he's prevented from getting his drugs. But of course, there would be a ridiculous concept of what freedom is, because why does the drug addict even want the drugs? It's not him as a rational being that wants the drugs. It's not that he thought about it and came to the rational conclusion that it would be good to take this drug. Rather, it's, so to say, the addiction in him that makes him want it. He is precisely not free. Freedom would be to rise above our desires, not just to follow each desire that overcomes us, but to rise above our desires and to ask ourselves, well, what should we desire, independently of what we happen to desire? And so I cannot stress enough, I already discussed that in the lecture on freedom, but I will stress it again, that the moral law to Kant is not something that is forced upon us from the outside. Like, it's not a commandment of God. It's also not Kant, some philosopher that has been dead for 2.5 centuries, in some old book demanding this from us, but rather it is our own reason. It is we ourselves, if we just reflect about what should happen, that tells us that this is what we should do, that this is our duty. And then the other reason I think people are triggered is because of their conscience. Like, they hear this morality of Kant, they hear that things are very much black and white, and at least unconsciously they are of course thinking, well, I'm not entirely white. So therefore, if everything is black and white, that means I'm black. That means I'm guilty. That means I am evil. And they feel judged, so to say. But I already mentioned in the previous lecture on the good will and the good deeds that according to Kant, in morality, we can judge in the sense of the German word urteilen, that is, we can judge whether an action was in accordance with the moral law or not. But what we cannot do is judge in the sense of the German word richten. So judge like the judge in court would do. So judge about whether someone is guilty or not. That must be left to God, because we cannot look into people's hearts. We cannot see how good or how bad their will is. So I would remind people that this morality is not meant to judge them in that sense. It's not meant, neither Kant nor I or whoever is saying, oh, you are evil, you deserve hell. If this is the message you are getting from this strict moral principle, then it's really you yourself thinking this. It's your own conscience being awoken by you hearing about this moral philosophy and telling you that you are inadequate. And rather than projecting that onto the person who talks about this moral philosophy and thereby accidentally evoke your conscience, rather than blaming that person and being angry at that person, you should just use this opportunity to listen to your conscience and to become a better person. But this is something, of course, that happens often in moral matters, right? That people get triggered when someone else wakes up their conscience. Just consider all the people who are angry and triggered at Greta Thunberg, whom I have already in previous lectures said several times, mentioned as probably the best current example of someone exemplifying Kantian morality. I've often heard triggered people say, oh, I am not going to let a little girl tell me that I can't fly anymore. And I have actually responded to someone who talked like that, saying, I'm willing to make a bet. I'm willing to bet you 100 euros or 1,000 euros if you want. I will pay you that much if you can point me at a single instance in some speech, in some interview, whatever, where Thunberg said that you mustn't fly, that she is forbidding you from flying, that she's demanding you stop flying. I could make such a bet because I've actually listened to over 300 of interviews and speeches and so on. And therefore, I can feel pretty sure in making such a bet because there has never been an instance where she said that. Quite the contrary, whenever she has been asked, she said everyone has to decide that for themselves. She is not telling anyone what to do, she's just stating the facts. We are in a climate crisis, flying contributes to it, and now you have to draw your own conclusions from those facts. So, again, why are people so triggered at her? Why do people think that she is forbidding them to fly when she's just saying flying ruins the climate and it's up to you to decide what you make of that? Well, because what they make of it, or what their conscience makes of it, is telling them, oh, if this is the case, then I should probably stop flying. But they don't like this, so they project what they themselves are unconsciously thinking or feeling, project that onto Thunberg as if she had said that, and then they get triggered and say, oh, who is she to tell me how to live my life? So this is, let's say, a mechanism, this is a reaction that you often have when people are being reminded of their true moral duty. Their conscience wakes up, and it is not the other person, the reminder, it is their own conscience telling them what to do or what not to do. But if they don't want to do it, then they will project that onto the person and get triggered and say, oh, that person is taking away my freedom, is telling me what to do, that's not his place, and so on. So, reflect about yourself. If you reject Kant's rigorism, ask yourself critically, why is that? Might it just be because I have this liberal concept of freedom? I think that this restricts my freedom because it doesn't let me blindly follow each whim? Or is it because it wakes up your own conscience and you feel bad about who you are and how you've lived your life so far? Those would not really be philosophical counter-arguments, would they? Now, what is the main criticism against Kant's rigorism? Usually you hear people saying this is not realistic, this is not taking into account human nature, Kant is expecting or demanding too much, his morality is a morality for angels and not for humans, we can't just be good, and so on and so on. And this is a very dishonest criticism, because those people who talk like that, they pretend that they can't be moral in the sense of Kant, but the truth of the matter is that they just don't want to be. It's not that it's not possible, it's that they don't want it. Because what does it mean to be moral for Kant? It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to completely let go of all your desires and completely let go of happiness. This would be what Kant calls the ethic of monks, or the virtue of monks. This total asceticism is not what he asks for. But you are allowed to seek your happiness, but if there is a collision, if there is a conflict between your moral duty and your happiness, if there's a case where you can't do both, then what is morally good should always come first. And your happiness should always come second. So you don't need to constantly sacrifice it, but if seeking your happiness would mean sacrificing the morally good, then you should rather sacrifice your happiness. That is precisely what this motto fiat justitia et pereat mundus means, right? Justice comes first. It doesn't mean that I always have to sacrifice the world for justice, but if I have to sacrifice the world, if justice is only possible if the world perishes, then let the world perish. And me, that is myself, as part of the world with it. What is therefore, on the other hand, being evil? I talked in my previous lecture on the radical evil. I talked about the fact that to Kant there is no evil will in the sense of a devilish will that wants evil as such. No one, Kant would say, wants what is evil simply for its own sake, for the sake of being evil. Rather, what is evil is not wanting what is good first and foremost. You are evil if your happiness is more important to you than whatever the moral law demands. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you always do evil things. Maybe you can even be a decent, a nice person most of the time, because maybe most of the time your happiness and the demands of the moral law align. But if it comes to a case where they don't align, then you will rather pick your happiness. So you are evil if your motto is basically the opposing motto, fiat mundus, or rather fiat ego, so let there be the world, or let there be me, let there be myself, et pereat justitia, even if justice perishes over it. That would be evil. And as I explained in the previous lecture on the radical evil, this is not something that our sensuality, that our sensual desires pull us towards. Because if that were the case, we would not be guilty, right? We would not be responsible if we just happen to be too weak, if we just cannot withstand our own desires, but rather the radical evil, not the extreme evil as I explained in that lecture, but the radical evil. So the radical comes from radix, from root. So the deep-rooted evil, the evil at the root, the fundament of all evil, is that propensity in the human being to go with the second motto, to say, let there be the world, let there be myself, my own happiness, even if justice perishes over it. So make that decision first. Not being too weak, not being overwhelmed by your desires, but rather before that already making the decisions that you would rather follow your desires, if it comes to that, than the moral law. I mean, if you think about it, again, no one wants to necessarily do evil as such. The people doing evil acts would probably not do them if they could accomplish their goals in some other manner, like someone who commits fraud. He probably doesn't want to trick and deceive another person just for the sake of deceiving that person. He wants money. Now, if he could get that money in a lawful manner, like if someone would just gift him $1 million, or if he would just win the lottery, then he would probably not bother committing fraud. But since he can't, since there's a conflict between what the law demands and what his own desires demand, he now makes the decision that it is okay to break the law, and to rather go with his desires. Likewise, the rapist is probably not raping for the sake of raping and for the sake of harming someone. He maybe just wants sex, and if he could have the sex in a lawful manner, like if that other person would consent to the sex, then he would probably not resort to raping. It's just that since this is a case where he cannot have his desire in a lawful manner, the other person does not consent, where there's a conflict between his desire, his happiness, and the moral law and its demands, now he says, my individual desires are more important. I'm willing to break the law for that. I'm not breaking the law for the sake of breaking it. Again, I would conform to the law if I could do so while still getting what I desire. But since I can't, then I'm willing to break the law. That is what is evil. That willingness to take your desires as more important than the moral law. And all those oh so smart people who will tell you that, oh, Kant's morality is unrealistic, this is not possible, we cannot act like this. If you listen to what they are really saying, not their words, but the meaning of their words, what they are really saying is not we cannot act like this, but rather we don't want to act like this. We cannot act like this if our desires and our happiness is what we should get. No one said that you should get those. You shouldn't get those if you can only get those by breaking the moral law. Just consider some examples where people will often claim that a too strict morality is just unrealistic and it's not possible to follow it. For example, when it comes to the climate, I often hear people saying, oh, you demand radical changes to save the climate, to change, to save the environment. That's not realistic. That would harm our economy and the economic growth. We can't do that. Well, what we actually can't do is live with 5-degree warming. And if you think that doesn't sound like so much, you should consider that in the last ice age, we just had 5 degrees less worldwide. So 5 degrees, even if it doesn't sound much, can make quite a difference. The thing is that people will go out of their way to claim that this is not realistic. This is a common cliche that German right-wingers will say. They will say something like, oh, do you want us to go back to the Middle Ages? To which I always reply, I mean, if that was what it takes, then yes, I would prefer living in the Middle Ages to living with 5-degree warming. But of course, that's not even necessary. I mean, even just 100 years ago, even just 50 years ago, sure, there were already emissions, but not to the degree we have nowadays. And people didn't live without any luxury back then. But the point is that people may say it's not realistic, but what they are really saying is we don't want that. We don't want those changes. We want to keep our luxury. And very clearly, those people are not actively evil. Like, I'm not saying that they actively want for the world to warm so much, that they actively want for whole islands or coastal cities like New York being swallowed by the oceans. I'm not saying that they want droughts, that they want burning woods, that they want more heat death, that they want 3 billion people to not be able to live anymore where they are currently living, and therefore that they want huge waves of refugees. I'm not saying they actively want that, but I'm saying they are willing to accept all of that. They are willing to sacrifice what is good and just if that is necessary to keep their luxurious lifestyle. Likewise, when I say, which I have been saying for many years, that we should try to be economically as independent as possible, especially from despotic states. We should not trade with a state like China or like Saudi Arabia, and we should not support those regimes and give them money. Then again, I hear people say, "Oh, that's unrealistic. That cannot be done. We need them." Why is it unrealistic? I mean, there was a time not so long ago when we didn't buy that many goods from China, and we managed to survive. It is certainly possible. Sure, now our economy is so entangled with them that we can't just change that from one day to the other. I'm not saying that it's a matter of days. It's time to change, but it would be possible. They just don't want it. And again, I'm not saying that they actively want to support despotic regimes. I'm not saying that they actively want to support the oppression of people in China in general, or let's say in Hong Kong or whatever. I'm not saying that they want to support the possible invasion of Taiwan. I'm not saying that they want to support the genocide of the Uyghur people. But what I am saying is that they are willing to accept all of this if it means being able to keep buying cheap products made in China. If it means being able to keep consuming as they are consuming. Or third example, here in Germany, you still have most people excusing the actions of their parents, grandparents, great grandparents in the Nazi time. Not excusing the Nazis at large. That's a minority who does that. But excusing their ancestors. Don't believe the lies that Germany has somehow dealt with its past. If we dealt with our past, it would mean condemning what our own grandparents did. But we don't do that. Ask in any German family, what did your grandfather do? Oh, yeah, sure, he was a soldier. He went into the Soviet Union. He went to Stalingrad. But ask them, was that wrong to do? They will say, "Oh, but he didn't have a choice, right? Back then, you had to fight as a soldier. If he hadn't done that, they would have killed him." I mean, I've heard that in my own family. I've heard that from my grandmother about my grandfather. And of course, to that, you could reply, I mean, first of all, it's a bit more complex than that, right? It's not that you necessarily would have been killed. I mean, if everyone or just a large number had refused to go to war, then there would have been no one to kill all those people, right? Sure, if you as a lone individual refuse and everyone else doesn't refuse, that's more of a problem. But if all those who point at others and say, well, because of them I couldn't refuse, if all of those had refused together, then maybe it would have been a different matter. But even if you're a lone individual, there's maybe other things you can do. Maybe you can run away, go to a foreign country, go into exile. Or maybe you can go underground, you can try to hide when they want to recruit you. Or maybe you can make yourself disabled, like cut off your hands, say you had a working accident and now unfortunately you can't go fighting anymore. But all of that aside, let's even say, okay, there's only the one possibility. Either you go fighting for a fascist, totalitarian, genocidal regime, or you let them kill you. But it still doesn't mean that you don't have a choice. That is a choice. And I mean, if you don't let them kill you, if you rather fight for them as a soldier, it still means someone dies, right? Just not you, just someone else. But that's what you will do as a soldier. You will kill people. So why should your life be more valuable than the life of those you are going to kill as a soldier? What you are saying basically is that if it comes down to me dying as an innocent, or me killing other innocents that have done nothing to me to save my own ass, then I will rather do the latter. And well, that is evil. That is the definition of evil. That is precisely saying fiat mundus et pereat justitia. Let there be the world, that is my world, even if it can only be through justice perishing. No, you could always have said, I will rather die with my honor intact. I will rather die with a clean conscience than live with blood on my hands. And here too, I'm not saying that all those people who excuse those who fought for the Nazis, that they are all active Nazi supporters, that they all think it's a good thing to fight for fascist, genocidal regime, to fight for totalitarianism. No, that's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that they believe, if it comes down to the choice of either following the moral law, doing what is right and just, but in the process sacrificing your own benefit, your own happiness, or doing what you desire, in this case staying alive, but at the cost of sacrificing what is just, then they would rather pick the latter. And the same goes for, again, in Nazi time, helping the Jews, right? I've had a discussion with someone years ago in some internet forum, where I, once again, in a calm manner, explained that, of course, if there had been a Jew on the run asking you to help him, to hide him, you should have helped him. And where I said to that other person, if you wouldn't have done that, you would have been evil. And that other person, he was of the opinion that, yeah, sure, it would have been a good thing to help the Jew. You would have been a hero for doing it. But he basically said that he probably wouldn't have done it. That he wouldn't have been brave enough. And when I calmly explained that that makes him evil, he got very triggered and he completely overreacted. He was completely infuriated, and he said that I was saying that he would have gloated and sadistically reveled in that Jew begging him for his life, which is of course something that I had not said. And you should always get suspicious when someone misreads in such an extreme manner, because you could only explain that either by that person being completely stupid, I mean, it's one thing to misunderstand something. It happens to all of us. I've also misread at times. But there's, let's say, a window of possible misinterpretations of a text. And then there are some misinterpretations that are so out there that you simply cannot read the text in that manner unless you are either completely stupid or you are evil. And I would always prefer going with that people are evil, that the problem is a practical one, not a theoretical one. It's not a skill issue, it's a will issue. I would never, unless I really had to explain such a thing by saying, oh, someone is just too stupid to understand. No, when there's such an extreme case of misreading, you can be sure that it is a case of, let's say, what psychoanalysis calls over-determination. The person feels triggered because his conscience, once again, is getting loud and is talking to him, and he's projecting that outward. The point here is that this guy was, of course, in contradiction with himself, saying it would have been good, you would have been a hero for saving that Jew, but I would not have done it. I would not have been brave enough. If it's good, I mean, what kind of judgment is that? That is a judgment that your reason makes, right? It's clearly not your feelings, not your desires making that judgment, because those are basically saying it would be good to stay alive, it would be good to stay safe. But your reason says it would be good for that Jew to be saved, it would be good to help him. If you don't go with what you yourself concluded, what your own rational insight is, you are not a free person. You are a slave of your drives. This saying, I think this would have been good, but I still would not have done it, is basically admitting I'm not a free being. And the issue here is that what you are saying is, my life is worth more than the life of that Jew. Of course, no one would phrase it like that usually. And again, people would, as he did, get very angry if you tell him that this is their position. He would reject that. He would say, no, I'm not saying that his life is worth more than mine. Of course, his life is worth just as much, and of course, he should be saved. I'm just saying that I would have been too afraid of dying myself to help him. But whether he likes it or not, we are rational beings. We are not just animals. We are not just ruled over by our sensuality, in this case by fear, but rather we can rule ourselves. So whether he likes it or not, all our judgments and all our choices must be able to be reduced to a basic principle, to a maxim, basically. And if I ask, what is that guy's maxim? Then clearly his maxim is, sure, if I can help someone, a Jew on the run, without risk of my own life, sure, I will help. So that Jew's life has some value to me. But if the choice is between that Jew's certain death, if I don't help him, or my own possible death, I mean, right, it's not even a choice between his certain death and my certain death, but rather his certain and my possible death, because if I help him, as long as we are not found out, I'm not dying. It's just a risk that we could be found out, and sure, then we are dying both. So if the choice is between his certain and my possible death, I will rather pick his certain death. And how could you do that rationally? Unless you say that your life is more important than his. I mean, people they just often refuse to engage in a rational argument, to acknowledge that they are rational beings. They want to break everything down to feelings. They will insist, no, it's not that I rationally say my life is worth more, it's just that I feel afraid. But this is precisely why Kant's teaching of the radical evil is so important. Yeah, I advise you to go back to that previous lecture on the radical evil, because what those people are claiming is basically this concept of evil as happening because sensuality was stronger, right? Rationally, I acknowledge that the Jew is not worth less than me, that he deserves to live, that he should be saved, but my sensuality, my fear for my own life is stronger. It overwhelms my rational insight. But no, what Kant says in his teaching of radical evil is you must already have made that choice, that decision rather. And that cannot have been influenced by your sensuality, because it was the decision to give in to your sensuality rather than to your reason. Because it sounds so self-evident. Of course, we would be afraid for our own lives in that situation. And so it makes sense to say this, the fear for my life was stronger. But this only makes sense if you already made the decision, my life is the most important thing. And so I will only save another life if it doesn't risk my own. But if you made the opposite decision, if your maxim is the most important thing is justice, and I will not sacrifice justice to save my life, but rather I will sacrifice my life to save justice, then the opposite claim would make just as much sense, to say, I had to save that Jew, again, out of fear, but not out of fear for my life, but out of fear for my honor, so to say, out of fear for justice. I could now say I was afraid of doing wrong. I was afraid of becoming guilty. I was so afraid of that I was willing to even risk my life. Just like the first person says, I was so afraid for my life that I was willing to even sacrifice another person. Both makes equal sense depending on what your maxim is. And that maxim, that decision for this or that maxim, comes before ever being influenced by your senses. And this is the point, that these people who say, oh, sure, it would have been good to save the Jews, but I would have been too afraid, whether they like it or not, they are basing this on the maxim that their life is worth more. Because only based on that maxim can they be more afraid for their life than for the other life. If they really truly believe that all lives matter equally, they would also be afraid for them equally. And if this is their maxim, how are they really better than the Nazis? Because the Nazis also had the maxim, right, that their lives matter more than the lives of the Jews. I mean, even here in the case of the Nazis, I'm not saying that they were evil in the devilish sense. I'm not saying, and Kant would not say, that they killed the Jews just for the sake of doing something evil. But rather they too simply said that their benefit, their happiness matters more than doing what is just. They would probably, just like he who commits fraud or he who vapes, would probably not do it if he could get what he wants without it. They too, if they could have gotten what they wanted without killing the Jews, they would probably have done it. Like, they believed that the Jews were a danger for the German people, that letting the Jews live would mean the Germans losing the war, the Germans being destroyed as a people, as a race. If they had believed that it was possible for the Jews to live without this bringing any disadvantage or any even slight harm to the German people, then they would have probably let the Jews live. I mean, why kill them in that case? So, in degree, in the specifics, you might be different from the Nazis if you would not have actively taken part, but if you say, oh, I would not have saved that Jew, but those specifics don't matter to Kant. What matters is the quality, is the actual basic maxim that you go by. And there we should realize that our maxims are probably often not so different from the Nazis' maxims. I mean, what was Hitler's whole plan? What Hitler was saying is the Germans need Lebensraum im Osten. They need living space in the East. We need to fight a colonial war. We need to conquer Ukraine. We need to commit genocide, first not against the Jews, but against the Ukrainians. We need to starve to death 30 or 40 million people, and we need to settle there. First off, to survive, to have enough food for ourselves, and then secondly, to live a life of luxury. And here Hitler even acknowledges that whatever is luxury is relative and subjective. It depends on what you see other people having, right? Like the people in the Middle Ages, they probably didn't mind not having smartphones. They didn't even know that you could have a smartphone, what that is, and they didn't therefore think that it was important. But nowadays, of course, let's say a teenager in a school class, everyone else has a smartphone and he doesn't. He will, of course, run to his parents and say, oh, buy me a smartphone, I need to have one too. So this is not a natural need like food, but rather this is a need you get by seeing that others have it. And so, as Hitler would have said, a life of luxury for the Germans means the Germans should live as good as the current technology allows. They should live as well as the people who currently live the best life on the planet are living, and those are the Americans. Hitler basically says, sure, you could clean your floors with a broom. Human beings have done that for hundreds and thousands of years, and it worked. But if the German housewife realizes that the American housewife has a vacuum cleaner, then she will not be satisfied with her broom again, and she will not be able to lead a good life with a broom anymore, but rather she will want a vacuum cleaner too. So it is okay, in order to give the German housewife her vacuum cleaner, in order for her to live the best possible life, to live as well as the Americans, it is okay to invade Eastern Europe, to colonize Ukraine, to kill off 30 or 40 million people. And I ask you, is that so different from our current maxims? I mean, currently, we in the West, we also want luxury. We want to consume. We want the best life that is currently possible on this planet. And I mean, we have that more or less in the West, right? No one is living better than us on the planet. Others are living worse. And we too are willing to sacrifice others, not even for our survival, but just for this luxury. we might not actively go there and wage wars, colonial wars. We might not actively go there and commit genocide. But is that really because we have become better, or is it just because we have become smarter and we realize that that's not even necessary? But what we are doing is, of course, we are profiting from many wars that are happening, wars for resources and so on. And what we are doing is we are responsible for exploitation. We are responsible for basically slavery, even though it's not official slavery anymore. But many people have to work hard, including children have to work. Many people are living under terrible conditions. Many people are dying. Again, not so that we can survive, but so that we can lead this luxurious and decadent life. And that is precisely what Hitler said we should be doing and is okay to do. So really, the basic maxim that many people follow nowadays is not so different as they would probably like to think from Hitler's basic maxim. And of course, I'm well aware that by saying such things, I'm not necessarily convincing people that Kant's rigorism and morality is correct. Rather, some people will be taken aback by this. Some people will even get agitated and triggered over it. But once again, he who is triggered is certainly wrong. And he who is triggered, in that moment of being triggered, has stopped being a human being, has become an animal, ruled over by blind desires, by blind affects, by blind instincts. And you cannot talk to an animal and reason with an animal. So I'm only addressing the others. That is, those who have some objectivity, those who can be detached to some degree, to think about something critically, even something that concerns themselves. And to those, I will say that there are basically two manners of looking at things. The one is the unaufkläred manner, which is looking empirically. Looking at sensuality, and sensuality by Kant is defined as receptiveness. So the sensual is that which you receive. Something affects you and makes you receive certain sensations like colors, tastes, smells, and so on. That is sensuality. And if you go with that, then of course many things will look very different, and comparing them to one another may sound very weird or even scandalous. So then you will say, what the Nazis did, actively murdering the Jews, or rather just out of fear not helping a Jew, but not actively taking part in killing him, that's very different. Or you will say, the Nazis waging colonial wars, the Nazis committing genocide, that's very different from just mindlessly consuming, even if the latter may also be bad. And I don't disagree. In the sensual world, in the world of the phenomena, of the things as they appear to us, many things are different. Different to a degree that you can't really compare. Any comparison would seem absurd. But Aufklärung is about becoming free from being led by someone or something else, in this case being led by your sensuality, being led by what affects you and what data you receive, so to say. Aufklärung is about leading yourself, truly thinking for yourself. And this is required for philosophy, because the philosopher does not look empirically. at human matters. He leaves that to other fields, to the historian, to the psychologist, to the sociologist. What the philosopher does is he looks at the principles, that is, at the laws. What is the law from which A and B come? And no matter how different A and B may look, they may still have the same root. They may still come from the same law. I mean, this is what science in general does, right? Not just philosophy, also natural science. If you just look empirically, you may think that an apple falling down and the moon circling the earth are two very different things that cannot be compared. I mean, the moon is so huge, the apple is so small, it would be ridiculous to compare them. But for the physicist who understands the laws of nature, he of course understands that the same pull of the earth, the same gravity, is what makes the apple fall down, and is also responsible for the moon circling around the earth. So you need to be able to abstract from your sensations and to think about the principle behind it. And what I'm saying is that there can only be two principles when it comes to our actions, or specifically when it comes to a conflict between our happiness and whatever is right. And those principles would either be, let there be justice, even if the world must perish. That is, I'm willing to sacrifice my happiness for justice. Or, let there be the world, even if justice perishes. That is, I am willing to sacrifice what is right for my own benefit. And if the latter is your maxim, and the propensity for this maxim again is what Kant calls the radical evil, if the latter is your maxim, then you are evil. Doesn't matter what exactly comes forth from that maxim, how extreme or not so extreme your specific actions may be, but at the root of it, by your basic maxim, by your willingness to sacrifice what is right for your own happiness, you are evil. And that is the point here. And what I would wish for is at least some honesty. What I would wish for is that those who reject morality, and I'm not saying reject Kant's morality, but reject morality altogether, because Kant's morality is morality. It's not his specific opinion. This is what is moral. So those who reject morality, I would wish for them to stop with the sophistry and to at least be honest about what their position is. Because usually their counter-arguments against Kant's maxim are terribly dishonest, because they secretly already imply their own maxim. But they have to first prove that maxim. Like, the counter-argument will usually be, oh, this moral demand is too much, it is not possible to do this, the world could not work if we try to do this. And this statement could be factually right or wrong, but let's say it's right. Let's say the world would not work if we did this. Why is that a problem? It is only a problem if you already accept the premise, let there be the world even if justice perishes over it. So if you already accept the premise that the world comes first. Because if you accept the opposing premise, that justice comes first, then I could have the same right to say to them, as a counter-argument, your morality doesn't work. What you are proposing doesn't work, because with that, maybe you would gain happiness, but with that, justice would perish. You are saying what I propose doesn't work because it would ruin the world, but what you propose would ruin morality, would ruin what is good. So therefore, what you propose doesn't work. So at least be honest, accept that yes, things are black and white. There are only these two possible maxims. One thing must come first in case of conflict, either your personal happiness or the demand of the moral law. You can't have both. So be honest about it. And if you pick your personal happiness, then in your maxim, you are no different from any villain, from any evil person. This is exactly what Kant means by morality being all about the good will, which I explained in a previous lecture, right? Morality not being about your actions, about whether outwardly you are doing good or bad, but being about your will, about whether you have reverence for the moral law or not. And as I explained in that previous lecture, while lacking goodwill, you can still outwardly be a decent person because of, let's say, biographical coincidences, how you were raised, what temperament, what desires you have. But none of that is really something that gives you merit, that you can be praised for. It just so happens to be that way. So it's a coincidence of two people with the very same maxim, both saying my happiness is more important than what is good. If one of them becomes a villain, does terrible things, and another leads a decent life and doesn't harm anyone, it's just a coincidence. At the root of it, if we look at their will, they are both evil and they are both equally evil. And the second person, if he was thrust into the same circumstances as the first person, if he had the same temperament, if he had been raised in the same way, would be doing the exact same things. And this leads us to a great benefit of Kant's rigorism, because what it can give us is it can make us more humble. It is a great it's a great means against self-righteousness in morality, because there are many people who just look at their outer actions, right, and see, okay, I'm living as a decent person, and then will self-righteously think, therefore I must be a moral person. I mean, especially you have many people who will first only care about their well-being and not think about the fact that their well-being comes at the cost of 90% of the people on this earth suffering, having a worse life, or comes at the cost of the future because of the climate. No, they first think of their well-being, and then secondly, they also allow themselves some sort of morality, right? Now that their well-being is taken care of, now that they have a big house and go on vacation a few times a year and so on, and constantly buy new things, they will also, on top of that, be nice to others, or follow some political correct rules of conduct, of how you should speak. Or they will also now donate a little money to a good cause. And now they will self-righteously think that they are good people. but they are clearly not, which you can easily see just from the fact of how quickly they will sacrifice even that little morality they have. They will how quickly they will stop being nice and friendly and decent, and have good manners, if somehow their lifestyle, their well-being is attacked. No, that morality of theirs, that alleged morality, is itself no more than part of their well-being, right? They do it to feel good about themselves, to make their conscience go quiet. But they don't do it because they truly care about morality. If they truly cared, they would probably be willing to make some sacrifices for it. So the great benefit of this rigorism is that it prevents us from lying to ourselves. If you go back to my lecture on the radical evil, I said that to Kant there are three types basically of radical evil. The first is about allowing yourself to be weak, allowing yourself to rather follow your sensual desires than the moral law. That is the frailty of the human heart. And the second, the impurity of the human heart, is about, even when you are doing good, allowing yourself to do it not out of reverence for the moral law alone, but allowing yourself to do good deeds out of some other feelings like compassion or whatever. And these types of evil you will still be capable of even as a moral rigorist, to be sure. You will still have to fight with yourself. You will still have to cultivate virtue in yourself always. But the third type of evil, the perversity, or as Kant also says, the corruption of the human heart, being willing to accept maxims that are not moral, and then probably lying to yourself about it. And I said in that lecture that the true root of evil is basically deceit, is basically this willingness to lie to ourselves. This you cannot do as a rigorist. Once you accept the moral law in all its strictness, and once you accept that there are no exceptions and that there are no excuses, that this is truly your duty and you must do it even if the world perishes, you are still capable of not doing your duty. You're still capable of choosing the world over justice, but at least you will then know that this was wrong to do. At least you will not be able to make up some excuse why this was okay if you are a rigorist. So if you are a moral rigorist, it forces you to be honest with yourself about what is your duty and about whether you did your duty or did something evil. Or you could also say it the other way around, maybe, that if you are honest with yourself, this will force you to become a moral rigorist. But I don't really need to bother arguing here, because the basic problem is that to many people, rationality is just about instrumental reason. I discussed this in the lecture on the imperatives, where I said that you can use your reason as basically just an instrument to reach your goals, but those goals themselves are not rational. They come out of your nature. They are your sensual desires. And most people just understand that by reason. The mere thought that they can have autonomy, that reason cannot just be used to reach your unreasonable goals, but that reason itself can set the goal, the purpose, which would then be the purpose of morality. is such an alien thought to them that it's no use arguing about details of them. They first have to accept this basic thought that no, I'm not necessarily ruled by my senses. So, for example, my fear for my life does not necessarily come first, but rather me deciding to do the good thing can also come first. What I do want to say is that this harsh and also kind of venomistic sounding motto, fiat justitia et pereat mundus, is really just a manner of speaking, according to Kant. He says, in truth, the world as such is not in danger. The world will not perish if there is justice. In fact, that cannot be, because what does justice mean? It means precisely an order of things that makes a world in peace without chaos possible. I discussed that in my lecture on the kingdom of purposes and the categorical imperatives, that to Kant, morality is precisely about acting in a manner that if everyone acted like that, we could have paradise on earth. If everyone acted like that, we would have a harmonious kingdom of purposes where everyone can follow his purpose, his goals, without interfering with the purposes of others. That would obviously be a world that would work. It is precisely as long as people are immoral that the world doesn't work, right? It doesn't work because they have opposing goals that cannot go together. It doesn't work that I have the same money that the other person has. I cannot steal his money while he also keeps what is justly his. This doesn't work. So it is not that the world would perish if we all acted morally. It's just that, of course, a world may perish if we act morally. That is, the world as it is now, the unjust world, will of course perish if we start caring about justice. And this is the actual problem, right? People may claim that Kant's morality, it doesn't work, it's unrealistic, it's too idealistic, this cannot be done. But what they are really saying is it doesn't work as long as everything is supposed to stay as it is, as long as we want to keep the status quo. But who the fuck said you should keep that? This is a counter argument that is factually right. Yes, the current world cannot persist with justice, but as a counter argument, it's completely worthless, because no one said that the current world has any worth and should be kept. So when they say, radical climate policy is not possible, of course it is possible. Once again, humans lived for the longest time. They lived for millennia in a manner that did not ruin the climate. What they are really saying is radical climate policy is not possible while I, at the same time, fly on vacation once or twice a year. Yes, that is indeed not possible. But who said that you should fly once or twice a year? Which is precisely why Kant translates this motto, fiat justitia et pereat mundus, in a somewhat more free manner as let there be justice, even if the villains or the scoundrels in the world perish. Because again, it's not the world as such that is in danger from justice, it is just the scoundrels in their villainous and their unjust ways that would perish. And this leads me to one more important point of Kant's. Kant says it is high treason against reason if you take a rule that reason formulates, that reason says should be a rule that should be followed, and if you work towards that rule not being accepted, not being followed, by claiming that following it would lead to something bad, would lead to some evil, that in truth only comes about because we don't follow that rule. Because if you think about it, when people say this is not possible, like following this moral principle, it doesn't work, this is unrealistic. When people say this is not possible, and you ask them why is it not possible, they will usually say because things are like that. Right? A is not possible because B is the case. Like, it's not possible that humans fly. Why not? Because humans don't have wings. And the same they will say in moral matters. They will say, oh yeah, world peace, it's a nice idea, but it's not possible because human nature is warlike. There will always be wars. Or taking in all the refugees in need is a nice idea, but it's not possible because they will be criminals and it will cause chaos and it will harm our own country. You should notice that those people who argue against the moral law, they usually don't argue by saying this rule that reason gives us, saying you should work towards world peace or you should help refugees in need. They never say this rule as such is wrong. They never say, no, reason doesn't actually give us that rule. Reason gives us another rule. Reason tells us to work towards war, for example, and not towards peace. No, they cannot say that. That would be too obviously wrong and evil. So what they do instead is they refuse to even enter this discussion on what reason demands from us. They simply go to experience. They don't ask what reason demands, they ask what experience tells them about how the world is, and they say, based on our experience of how the world is, this demand of reason is not possible. They don't say it's wrong, they don't say it's not a demand of reason, they don't say it's immoral, they say it's unrealistic, it's blind, dreaming idealism that cannot be done. We need to be more pragmatic. Well, to this, Kant says that only by following this experience of yours do you create such an experience, do you create such a world where it is no longer possible without causing harm to follow the moral law. Kant says at one point in the Critique of Pure Reason, for there is nothing more pernicious and more unworthy of a philosopher than the vulgar appeal to a so-called adverse experience, which indeed would not have existed if those institutions had been established at the proper time and in accordance with ideas. While instead of this, conceptions crude for the very reason that they have been drawn from experience, have marred and frustrated all our better views and intentions. What he means by that is, you justify your not following the moral law by saying experience shows that this would have bad consequences, but those bad consequences only come about because we didn't follow the moral law in the first place. And for this you can give endless examples. I mean, let's start with something simple. I took care of elementary school kids some years ago, and there was one boy about 9 years old, 8, 9 years, I would say, who, of course, realized that I was different from other the teachers at school that would usually take care of them. Who, of course, realized that there were no arbitrary, useless rules with me, no arbitrary restrictions, that I allowed them more freedom than others. And when he realized that, he started with great joy and amusement to constantly say shit and fart and penis, penis, penis. And he wouldn't stop, like for 10 minutes or longer. He had fun saying penis, shit, fart, and treating this like it was the greatest thing ever. And of course, this got annoying. And now, this is a case where many people would tell me, see, this is why you cannot allow them everything. This is why these children need rules. Otherwise, they will get annoying. But I ask you, what is so fun about saying penis? And not just saying it once, but saying it again and again and again for minutes. Isn't that pretty boring? And why penis or fart? Why not chair or cat? What is so special about those words? I mean, the word as such is just a random noise. Why would it bring more pleasure to bring forth this random noise with your mouth than some other random noise? The answer is, of course, because the child was usually, by his parents, by his teachers, forbidden from saying such words. And now that he could without getting punished, he therefore got pleasure from doing something taboo, from breaking a rule, from doing something forbidden. But you see, this is not what a normal, healthy, natural child would do if you don't give him rules. This is just what a child would do if you first give him restrictive rules and then lift them. The rules pervert the natural desires, so to say. And I can speak from experience because I didn't grow up with such stupid rules. Like, my dad wouldn't have minded me saying penis. But that is precisely why I didn't constantly say penis. I would have found that no more fun a game than constantly saying chair or car or cloud or whatever. Because as such, the word is not very interesting. We only make it interesting if we restrict it. And this is precisely what Wilhelm Reich found, who is a student of Freud, fought against authoritarian education and authoritarian way of raising children, and who fought against sexual repression. It was him who coined the term sexual revolution, even though the sexual revolution that happened about 10 years after Reich's death was not exactly what he had in mind. And Reich described that it is this restrictive way of growing up that first creates unnatural desires in people that then make these restrictions actually necessary. And Reich tells of one case where he employed a young man that first seemed promising and seemed interested in Reich's theories. He employed him in his laboratory. And then pretty soon that young man started becoming very disrespectful towards Reich. And then one day that young man would walk around completely naked and would start harassing the female employees. And when Reich had a stern talking to him, the guy didn't understand at all, and thought that Reich was being hypocritical, because he basically said, oh, but didn't you say you are against authoritarianism? So why do I need to respect you as my boss? I thought you are against authority. And didn't you say that you are for sexual revolution and for sexual liberation and against all this sexual restrictiveness and conservatism? So what is wrong about me walking around naked and harassing the female employees? And here, reflecting about this, Reich also says that a normal, natural, healthy person would not act like that. He would not go out of his way to show his disrespect, to show that you, my boss, are no authority to me. And also a normal, healthy person would understand, like he would be able to self-regulate his sexual desires. He would not repress them, but he would understand that there's a time and place for them and a right manner to go about them. He would not just randomly walk around naked and harass people. It is only when someone grew up in a very restrictive manner, and now those restrictions are seemingly taken away, that he will react in such a manner. But those who are proponents of those restrictions will now feel justified and say, see, told you so, those restrictions are needed, and not acknowledge that it is their restrictions in the first place who caused this. And this is something we can find everywhere in the world, right? Just consider the current, or I mean, what's to say current situation in Palestine that's going on for one human lifetime already. Here too, you will find Israel's apartheid regime being justified, and this is apartheid, right? There's no right to have opinions here. We are way, way beyond the point where you could possibly have any opinion on this. This is just a fact. Denying that this is apartheid, you might as well deny that the sky is blue. No serious person denies this at this point, right? International Court has decided that Israel is in breach of the international law that is forbidding apartheid, and even long before that court ruling, all serious NGOs, including Israeli ones like B'Tselem, like Breaking the Silence, have said this is apartheid. Anti-apartheid activists from South Africa, like Mandela, like Tutu, like including Jewish anti-apartheid activists, South African Jews, have described this as apartheid even decades ago, when it was not as bad as it is now. So saying this isn't apartheid is really, I mean, it makes you an evil person, because it is only possible if either you lie, or out of ignorance and ideological reasons, you make a judgment about something which you simply cannot judge because you don't know enough about. Everyone who knows what's going on there knows this is apartheid. And the point, however, is that this apartheid gets justified with Israel's security, right? They will say, oh, we need the wall, and we need the occupation of the West Bank, and we need the settlements on the West Bank for our security. If we took the wall away, if we took the checkpoints away, then there would be more terror attacks. There would be Palestinians coming to Israel and stabbing people, or blowing themselves up. And even more so if we ended the occupation, if we gave the Palestinians freedom, if we gave them their own state. I mean, even without that, we constantly had rockets flying from Gaza to Israel, right? And if we gave them their own state, then there would only be more rockets. Then we would have to contend with an actual state, with an actual army attacking us. And to me, the point is not that all of that is necessarily completely wrong. It might indeed be that if some restrictions were lifted from the Palestinians, some would use that to commit a terrorist attack. But you have to ask yourself, why would they do so in the first place? What drives them to do that? Where does the hatred, and I'm not denying that there certainly is some hatred amongst some Palestinians. Certainly, there's less hatred amongst the Palestinians towards Israelis than the other way around. But still, there certainly is hatred. But where does it come from? I mean, you will often hear that, oh, the Palestinians, they are anti-Semites, which of course is completely superficial and ahistorical. I mean, there is no real historical anti-Semitism in the Arab world, right? I'm not denying that in more recent times and more recent decades, some European concepts and some European cliches and conspiracy theories about Jews also leaked out of Europe and also into the Arab world. But there has not been that same history of oppression and persecution and hatred of Jews in the Arab world. It's simply not there. And it is frankly quite ridiculous to think that the Palestinians are simply driven by anti-Semitism. I mean, I always find it absurd because it seems to imply that if all the history of the last over 70, or let's say the last 100 years, had been the same, except that it had not been the Jews. So let's say some other European people had come and colonized Palestine and driven 700,000 people away, committed ethnic cleansing, committed the Nakba. And let's say they had for a whole human lifetime oppressed them, driven them, in the case of Gaza, into basically a huge ghetto, occupied them in the West Bank for decades, the longest military occupation in modern human history. If another people had erected this regime of apartheid, if another people had built these settlements, subjected the Palestinians to this oppression, to these humiliations, if another people had made Gaza so unlivable, and I'm not even speaking of the current genocide and of the current starving of people, but I mean, even before the 7th of October, conditions there were terrible, right? Many people, there was huge unemployment, there was a lack of perspective, a lack of future, especially for the young people. Very, very large numbers of children showed signs of trauma, signs of depression, self-harm. If we imagine all of this had been the same, but not done by the Jews, let's say, I don't know, after World War II, the land of Palestine had been given to the Roma people, because, of course, the Nazis also persecuted gypsies and also committed a genocide against the Roma. So we could have said, oh, the Roma, in order to be safe, they need their own state. And Germany could say that it is Staatsräson, it is our reason of state to support the Roma state. Of course, nobody does it. Nobody in German gives a flying fuck about the Roma people. We are still very much racist against Roma, and we barely even acknowledge that they were victims of the Nazis too. But if that had been the case, or if, I don't know, the British had taken Palestine for themselves to settle like they settled Australia, or let's say the people from, I don't know, Argentina or Ghana or from Laos or whatever, had somehow settled Palestine, but everything else would have been the same. It's ridiculous to think that the Palestinians in that case would just have accepted not having human rights and accepted being oppressed or even genocided now, that there would have been no Fatah, no Hamas, that they would have just said, oh, okay, we don't have rights, we don't have our own statehood and sovereignty and freedom, but you, our oppressors, you are not Jews, so we are fine with being oppressed. I mean, this is just so ridiculous that I would refuse to even discuss, to even enter serious debate with someone who claims this. This is clearly a bad faith argument, just saying, oh, it's anti-Semitism. So, if we ask, okay, where does the hatred come from? Why would some Palestinians turn to terrorism? And again, it's this terrorism, this possible terrorism, that is used to justify the occupation and everything else, right? Then the answer is clearly it is that very occupation. It is that very regime of apartheid. So this regime is justified by protecting Israel from a danger that, I will admit, at least to some degree, is indeed a real danger, but it is a danger that was only created by the very measures that are meant to save from that danger. And likewise, consider times when our societies were less equal. Not saying that they are totally equal now, but when they were less equal. Consider a time when, let's say, women couldn't vote or black people couldn't vote. Consider the arguments back then. Many would have said, oh, it's ridiculous that you want to give women or black people the vote. This is too much responsibility, taking part in the government of the country. You cannot give them that responsibility. They are not educated enough. They are not smart enough. They are not mature enough. They, like children, need to be governed but not take part in the government themselves. These arguments, while certainly racist or misogynist or whatever, I'm not saying that they would have been totally wrong in every case. Surely, let's say the black slaves, many of them maybe were not fit, did not have the right education to immediately be responsible citizens of a republic. But then, if you had asked me why is that the case, I would have told you it is precisely because you treated them in that manner. If you treat people as basically subhuman or basically children, if you don't let them go to school, if you don't let them have an education, then of course they will turn into people that don't have an education, that maybe need others to lead them. But if you had treated them from the start as equals, if you from the start had given them the same opportunities, the same education, then it would have been different, right? And the same is true still nowadays. The very same argument is still used against actual children nowadays, right? I mean, we could debate about the voting age, and at least there's a slight debate about it in Germany. I mean, it's not like the grown-ups really care, but the last government at least had claimed that it would lower the voting age from 18 to 16. It didn't. Just like pretty much anything else it claimed it would do, it didn't do. And I mean, lowering it to 16, this really should not even be controversial. This is once again something you're not allowed to have an opinion on. Like, you can just not claim that this would somehow I don't know, who in the state cause chaos, because it has already been done elsewhere. In Austria, you can vote at 16. In Malta, you can vote at 16. And these countries, so far, they still exist. I mean, to be sure, the Austrians have recently voted for Nazis, but I mean, so have done many other countries like the US, uh, where you have to be 18 to vote. So I think we cannot blame the 16-year-olds exclusively for that. Um, but my point would be not about lowering the voting age from 18 to 16, which is not even debatable, but rather about completely getting rid of it. And of course, many people would think that is ridiculous. Oh, you cannot let children vote. They are not ready. They are not mature enough. They don't understand politics enough. I mean, first of all, if that was really your criteria, I mean, we could debate if that should be the criteria, right? Personally, I would stress that taking part in politics in our democracy is not about whether you have the maturity for it. It is simply about the principle it concerns you, so you should have a say in it. You are part of this society, so you should be allowed to shape it. You are influenced by the government's decisions, so you should have a say in that. You have to follow the laws, so you should get to decide or to take part in deciding what laws there even are. But that aside, even if you do say this should be the criterion, we should base voting on maturity, then there should not be a specific age. It's not like people magically turn mature once they turn 18 and the day before they have still been immature. But rather, then you would need to make some sort of test, like you would need a voting license, like a driver's license. We should then base it not on a specific age, but on passing the test. And that is something I think that many people who would be against getting rid of the voting age because of children's alleged immaturity could not want. Because if that test was done in a serious manner, I doubt many of them would pass it. But that's not my point here, and it's not something I want to discuss here. What I want to point out is that might be, yes, that many children are immature, but how much of that is because we treat them as such? So many people believe that children are stupid, and I mean, it's completely socially acceptable to say children are stupid, right? Racism against children is completely acceptable. Just go into polite society and at one point say women are stupid or black people are stupid, and at another point say children are stupid, and look how differently people will react to you. My point is that children are largely what we believe them to be, and therefore how we treat them, and therefore what we make them. There have been other points in history where children have been given more responsibility, where it was totally normal that a child of, I don't know, 5, 6 years old would be sent with a herd of goats into the mountains to care for them on its own, maybe be out there for days. Where it was totally normal that a child of maybe 7, 8 years old would be sent out into the wide world and roam the country in a band with other children to go to school, to go to university on its own, to go from city to city, sometimes begging, sometimes stealing, sometimes working. And no one would tell the parents, oh, what terrible parents you are, letting your children go out into the country alone. Wandering around for months or years. And the parents would also not be afraid for their children. While nowadays parents are afraid to even let their children go play on the other side of the street because something could happen, some stranger could do something to them. And I'm not necessarily saying that this manner of dealing with children that was the case some centuries ago was necessarily good in all respects or better than what we are doing now. I'm not saying that I want to go back to that. I'm just saying that a lot of things that seem very obvious and self-evident to us now are not necessarily, but rather they are products of how we treat things, how we treat people, and thereby how we make the world. Humans have this tendency to treat way too many things as nature, including many things that are actually culture. And by culture, of course, I don't mean the more narrow and more superficial concept of culture we have nowadays, like reducing culture to, I don't know, our customs and our art, but rather I mean the actual word culture, right? As in cultivating something. So culture in Latin is basically the opposition to nature, right? Nature is that which by itself is the way it is, and culture is that which by humans was made the way it is. And I'm saying that many people think that something is natural. Some manner people are behaving is natural, or some manner a certain group of people is behaving is natural, and therefore cannot be any other way. When in fact these things are probably not natural, but are just the product of what we created. And that is why Kant says it is so unworthy of a philosopher to just ask experience, how is the world? That is the world that we created, and often created through injustice, and use that as an argument against reason when reason tells us how should the world be. No, we should start from how should the world be? What does our reason demand from us? Just think of how much of the progress we already did make seemed very much unrealistic not so long ago to people. I mean, there was a time where if you had said, oh, we should have democracy, all people should have a say in how they are governed, you would have been ridiculed. Most people would probably have told you, no, this can't work. Maybe you can have a republic with some educated people or some nobles voting, but you cannot possibly let the peasants vote or whatever. Or you need a strong monarch. Or there was a time not so long ago where if you had talked not just about world peace, but even just about peace in Middle and Western Europe, people would have told you, no, there will always be wars here. The Germans and the French will always hate each other and be at each other's throats. Things will never be settled. So those same people who thought that this was unrealistic idealism, they are the same people who will now say that world peace is unrealistic idealism. Well, world peace is a demand of reason. You cannot possibly say that it is a bad thing, that it is not something that should happen. But if it should happen, then we should work on it instead of saying, oh, experience tells us it cannot happen. That experience is something that was created through our unjust actions. What Kant is saying is not that experience is completely unimportant. That is why I talked about the different fields of science in my lecture on what is philosophy, and then specifically the lecture on what is metaphysics. And there I explained that to Kant there is, when it comes to practical philosophy, there is a metaphysics of morals, which deals with what is our moral duty. And here there's no place for experience. We just ask reason, what should happen. But Kant also says there should be what he calls moral anthropology, which would be an empirical science of the human being, of human nature, in order to find out how can we become moral. So how can we the duty that is formulated in the metaphysics of morals, how can we make sure that that duty is followed? What obstacles are there in human nature, and how can we overcome them? How can we make ourselves have reverence for the moral law, and how can we overcome our harmful drives and so on? So there is a place for experience, but it should come second. I mean, it's just like consider a physician. He wants to heal a sick person. Sure, he needs experience. He needs to actually look at the person and see what is that person's sickness. But he first needs to have an idea on what is the goal. He needs to have an idea of health, right? And he needs to know what would be a healthy life for that person. A healthy life would mean a life without any issues, without any pain, without any suffering, and so on. And now, in the second step, the physician can use experience to ask in what way is the person not living that healthy life. Does he have the sickness A or does he have the sickness B? And on that, of course, depends, should I rather give him these pills or should I give him those pills, or should I rather do surgery, and should I do surgery on the heart or on the lung or so on? Sure, for that I need experience, but to see from where am I starting and what means do I need to apply to get to where I want to. But I don't need experience to ask where do I want to go. I need to ask my reason, where do I want to go? So likewise, in morality, we should start with the ought. Yeah, what do we ought to do? And then, secondly, we can ask for the is. What is the case? And how can we get from what is the case to what ought to happen? But what we should never do is to start from what is the case and say, since this is the case, it must also be the case and cannot be changed, and therefore what we ought to do, we cannot do. And I mean, this is not even true only for moral matters. This is even true for pragmatic or for technical, practical matters, right? I mean, if humans had said, oh, experience tells us that we don't fly, we would never have developed means for flying. We would never have developed balloons or airplanes. We needed to start by what do we want, and in this case, of course, it's a want. It's not a duty. I mean, it's not a moral duty to fly, but it was something we wanted. And then, second, we can ask, okay, what is the case? The case is we don't fly and we don't have wings, so we need to find some other way to get to what we want. We need to construct some machine for it. We cannot just beat our wings, but we have to start from what we want, and in morality we have to start from what we should, what our duty is. So in conclusion, the point of moral rigorism is that we ask first what is good, what should happen, what is our duty, and we don't allow at this point any excuses. We don't allow to somehow muddle things, to somehow take anything away from the moral law. And that precisely helps us in using all our strengths and using all our creativity to reach that which we realized we should work towards. And when the criticism is that, oh, this morality of Kant, it's too idealistic, Kant would say, yes, it is idealistic. That is the point. But what is the point of ideas in Kant's philosophy? I already talked about this in earlier lectures on what is reason, because reason to Kant is the faculty of ideas. And idea in the language of philosophy is not just something I come up with. It's not this light bulb that goes off in my head, but rather an idea is specifically a concept of reason that is a supersensual concept of a maximum, something absolute that precisely for that reason of being absolute cannot be found ever in experience, right? An idea would be the idea of the good or the idea of justice, the idea of wisdom. You will not find absolute justice in experience. And what Kant shows, this is a main point of his whole philosophical revolution and of his turn from the theoretical to the practical in philosophy. What he shows is that the ideas do not mainly serve a theoretical function. They can have a regulative function in theory. I talked about that too in a lecture on the conclusion of Kant's critique of pure reason. But they don't allow for us to make new cognitions, to learn new things about the world. We cannot say, okay, we have an idea of goodness and therefore the absolute good, the absolute holy must actually exist. There must be a God who is holy. That doesn't work. But Kant says ideas are therefore not chimeras. They are not empty thoughts and illusions, but rather they have a practical function. They give us a goal, a purpose for our practical action. The idea of goodness tells us what we should do. So Kant would say, yes, what is ideal is not real. It's not out there in the world. It's just in my head, so to say. But it's in my head not as an empty dream, but rather it is in my head as a purpose, as a task. It is my duty to make that which now is just ideal, is just a thought, to realize it, to make it real, to make it into something that exists out in the world, to make the world better based on my ideas of goodness and justice. And here, it turns out, those who criticize this rigorism, they are the main people responsible for the world being as shitty as it is. They are, in the history of humankind, the obstacle. It cannot be measured in years or centuries or millennia how much they set us back, how much further ahead we could already be without them. Because the real issue is not the few actively evil people who actively cause harm. The good people could probably deal with those if it was just those few evil people. And the issue is not even that there aren't more good people. Like if most people didn't help, just like they don't help now, but instead just stood by and at least didn't stand in the way, maybe that would even be enough if they just let the good people do their good thing. But the problem is that so many, while not actively wanting to cause harm, maybe stand in the way. They don't help the good people, rather they make it harder for them. Whenever someone tries to do something good, he has to contend not only with the evil people who try to do the opposite, but he has to contend with a whole bunch of people saying, oh, what you are trying to do, it can't work, that's not realistic. Well, if you don't want to help, then just piss off and let us do our work, and then we will see. If it's not realistic, okay, let us fail. But at least don't make it harder. That's the least you could ask for. And I always find that all those people say, oh, what you are asking to save the climate, that's too much, it's not realistic, or to be more independent economically, to not be entangled with a despotic state like China, that's not realistic. They talk about this as if they were just observers without any responsibility, as if this was not about them. as if we were discussing some TV series and what the people in this fictional universe of the TV series should do. They should acknowledge that they are part of it. Whenever they are saying this is not realistic, people will not do this, people are not as good as you want them to be, they should remember that they are one of those people. And if they did it, then that would already be one as opposed to zero who did it. And if all those people will say, oh yeah, this would be nice, those ideas of yours, but it can't be done, if they would just do it, then it would happen. If all those who would say, yeah, sure, it would be nice if we didn't ruin the climate, if they, as individuals, just stopped ruining the climate, stopped consuming mindlessly, stopped flying mindlessly. Or likewise, if all those people who said, yeah, it would be better if we wouldn't support despotic, authoritarian regimes, if they just stopped supporting them, if they just started boycotting China or Muscovy or Saudi Arabia or the Emirates or whatever, or not even fully boycott them by all means, but at least try to boycott them as much as they can, at least think twice before buying something, at least think about, do I really need this? And then the world would already look very, very different. And that is why this rigorism is so important and why this criticism of this rigorism is so misplaced. But I want to get into this in one more lecture. This one was all in all more negative, more addressing the criticism and why this criticism is wrong. In the next lecture, I want to talk more positively about why it is important, according to Kant, to have an ideal of holiness in morality. An ideal not of just being a little good, but rather an ideal of a rigoristic ideal of absolute holiness. Why only with that you can have a proper morality. And why, if you only understand it right, that ideal is actually not so unrealistic. My deep thanks be to my supporters: Thomas Deuringer, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Oblomov, Ökobong, Samet Özkilic, Elif Özün, Yasin Özün, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Ron Suhl, as well as to all others who support me and my aufklären cause.